From censored files to clear evidence, this is Redacted Realms.
This phenomenon of forgotten crimes often occurs in bureaucratic systems, where paperwork errors can misclassify violent deaths as accidents or natural causes. Similar cases have been documented where administrative oversights, rather than intentional cover-ups, lead to cases being lost in the system. The mislabeling process typically involves initial responders using incorrect terminology that becomes permanent in official records. This creates a chain reaction, where subsequent investigators work from flawed documentation, perpetuating the error. Community memory often fades when official records don't reflect what residents initially witnessed or suspected. The normalization of incorrect information over years can make even violent events seem like ordinary occurrences to later generations. This pattern demonstrates how systemic failures in documentation can effectively erase crimes from public consciousness. The result is a disturbing reality, where violent deaths become statistical anomalies rather than criminal cases requiring investigation. The case began with what investigators term a non-investigation, where no official homicide inquiry was ever opened. This pattern occurs when initial responders or authorities classify a death under non-criminal circumstances without thorough examination. The body was discovered inside a residence in a mid-sized American city during the latter half of the 1900s. Such urban settings, with established infrastructure and law enforcement, typically see more procedural oversight than remote areas. Without an official homicide designation, the case lacked standard investigative resources like forensic teams or detective assignments. This contrasts with active investigations, which involve evidence collection, witness interviews, and potential suspect identification. The status, non-investigation, status meant the death was recorded, but no further criminal inquiry was pursued by authorities. In procedural terms, this often results from initial assessments ruling out foul play due to lack of obvious signs. Consequently, the case entered records not as unsolved, but as officially uninvestigated from a criminal standpoint. This foundational lack of inquiry created significant challenges for any later review or re-examination of the events. In many jurisdictions, initial death investigations rely on preliminary examinations and available information. These early assessments often determine whether a case warrants further resources or specialized investigation. When evidence appears straightforward, cases may be closed quickly to manage caseloads and allocate limited personnel. This administrative efficiency sometimes leads to classifications based on incomplete information or initial assumptions. The recording of a death under an incorrect category can occur when initial findings seem conclusive but lack thorough verification. Such classification errors are not uncommon in systems handling high volumes with limited forensic resources. The mechanisms behind these decisions involve balancing investigative thoroughness against practical constraints and available evidence. This pattern highlights how administrative processes can inadvertently cement initial assumptions into official records. Years or even decades after a case was considered closed, it can be unexpectedly reopened. This typically occurs through one of several established mechanisms in investigative work. One common trigger is a routine administrative review of old case files. A previously overlooked detail or a new analytical perspective can prompt a fresh look. Another pathway is initiated by family members conducting genealogical research. Their inquiries for personal history can inadvertently uncover connections to an unsolved investigation. A third mechanism involves a person of interest in a separate, unrelated case. Information they provide can create a link, reactivating a dormant file. These are standard, documented ways cold cases re-enter the active investigative cycle. Modern forensic techniques, unavailable during the original investigation, were applied to re-examine the evidence. This re-examination could include a new autopsy performed with current medical standards and technology. Such an autopsy might reveal trauma patterns inconsistent with the originally determined cause of death. Advanced toxicology screening, using methods like mass spectrometry, could detect substances previously undetectable. This might show evidence of poisoning through trace elements or metabolites that earlier tests couldn't identify. The application of these techniques represents how forensic science has evolved to provide more accurate conclusions. Such re-examinations can resolve long-standing questions when original investigations were limited by available technology. This process follows standard forensic protocols for cold case review when new scientific methods become available. The physical evidence, if preserved, could have revealed a different narrative. Misclassification often occurs when multiple systemic factors align. Bias against victims based on lifestyle, age, or social status can cloud initial assessments. Understaffed or untrained coroners' offices may lack resources for thorough investigation. First responders might miss suspicious circumstances that aren't immediately apparent. These combined factors create a perfect storm for investigative errors. The original classification error typically stems from this convergence of issues. Proper evidence preservation is crucial for correcting such misclassifications later. Investigators encountered a complete memory gap when questioning the community about the alleged homicide. Neighbors who had lived in the area for decades reported no recollection of any violent crime occurring at that address. Local reporters who had covered the area for years found no records or memories of such an incident in their archives. Even veteran police officers who had served in that jurisdiction could not recall investigating a homicide at that location. This phenomenon of collective memory gaps can occur in communities for various psychological and social reasons. Similar patterns have been documented in other cases where traumatic events become collectively suppressed or forgotten. The absence of any community memory created a significant investigative challenge for authorities. This type of memory gap raises questions about how communities process and retain information about traumatic events. Official records can sometimes obscure, rather than illuminate, effectively removing certain events from public awareness. This erasure creates significant gaps in our understanding of what truly occurred. In many such cases, critical information remains permanently unknown. We rarely possess a complete picture of a victim's final days or activities. Establishing a confirmed, minute-by-minute timeline of events leading to a death is often impossible. This lack of definitive knowledge is a common challenge in historical and forensic investigations. The absence of clear data forces reliance on patterns and incomplete evidence. These limitations shape all subsequent analysis and public understanding of the event. The absence of named suspects in many official investigations does not automatically indicate a cover-up. While corruption remains a possibility in some cases, systemic neglect offers a more common explanation. Systemic neglect refers to institutional failures, where procedures break down through inattention rather than malice. This pattern appears in various disaster investigations where oversight was inadequate. The psychological dimension is compelling. Neglect often stems from normalized complacency within organizations. Unlike active conspiracies, neglect involves a failure to act rather than a coordinated effort to conceal. This distinction is crucial for understanding how tragedies can occur without individual culprits. Investigations focusing solely on finding villains may miss these broader structural failures. This wasn't a deliberate cover-up or conspiracy, but a systemic failure of procedure. The truth wasn't actively buried. In many cases, it was simply never sought out. A critical document might be filed under an incorrect label, often due to a simple clerical error. This mislabeled file would then sit undisturbed in long-term storage, forgotten. Such data entry mistakes are common administrative failures across many organizations. The consequences, however, can be profoundly tragic when the lost information is vital. This pattern highlights how human error within bureaucratic systems can obscure facts. The absence of a search often leaves more unanswered questions than any deliberate act of concealment. The investigation's collapse reveals a critical vulnerability in public safety systems. When institutional memory fades, assumptions can replace evidence, creating dangerous shortcuts. This pattern demonstrates why well-funded, independent death investigation is non-negotiable. A rushed initial determination can permanently derail justice, locking investigations onto the wrong path. Skepticism is not cynicism. It's a necessary tool for medical examiners and coroners. The fragility of these systems means public safety relies on their robustness and procedural rigor. The invisible victim often belongs to society's most vulnerable groups. This includes the elderly living in solitude, individuals battling addiction, and those with minimal social or family connections. Their marginalization means their disappearances or deaths attract less initial scrutiny from authorities and the media. This lack of attention creates a vulnerability, increasing the risk that their cases will be incorrectly classified, such as an accident being ruled a suicide. In these situations, meticulous record-keeping becomes the critical lifeline for eventual justice. The preservation of all evidence, witness statements, and official paperwork is essential, even after a case is formally closed. This archived material provides the factual foundation needed to re-examine assumptions and correct initial errors in classification. Without these preserved records, the truth for marginalized victims might remain permanently obscured. The absence of physical evidence creates an insurmountable barrier in forensic investigations. Without biological samples like DNA or fingerprints, cases remain permanently unresolved. This evidentiary void prevents official acknowledgment that a crime even occurred. For families, this creates a unique psychological trauma beyond the initial loss. They must first fight for the crime to be officially recognized by authorities. Only after achieving this acknowledgement can the investigation toward resolution begin. This dual burden compounds their grief with systemic frustration. The lack of evidence transforms personal tragedy into institutional limbo. This isn't a ghost story. It's a story about how a fact, a violent death, can disappear under the weight of presumption and paperwork. Presumption often takes the form of initial conclusions that seem logical, but lack thorough investigation. Paperwork creates layers of administrative process that can obscure rather than clarify what actually occurred. This disappearance happens through categorization. Cases labeled as accidents or suicides without sufficient evidence. The slow, meticulous work of review is often the only thing that can bring these facts back to light. This review process involves re-examining evidence that was previously overlooked or dismissed. It requires questioning initial assumptions and following procedural gaps in the original investigation. Without this careful re-examination, violent deaths can remain misclassified indefinitely.
If this file opened your eyes, subscribe and open the next case.